part of Kevin's presentation. You got it.
One step ahead of you, Rio. And
Thank you.
if everybody else doesn't mind, I'm going to mute everybody but Kevin, just to cut down on the background noise. So thanks, guys.
All right. Well, all right. So you guys are the guinea pigs. This is a brand new presentation, and I don't do this on Zoom very often. So please do give me some feedback. This is kind of a work in progress. I'm trying to refine this talk so that we can share it with more audiences, get information that people don't understand maybe from this, a little bit better defined and stuff like that. So please do give me some feedback. Don't hesitate to ask any questions. And Deacon, I'm gonna lean on you to help me make sure that this all looks right. It looks like the screen share is disabled right now.
Try it again.
Okay. So this is where, Deacon, you might help me out. Since I have two screens, I'm not sure. What are you seeing?
You got your PowerPoint homepage.
We see a beautiful good PowerPoint.
Looks
and
good,
Kevin. And when I do that, are you seeing the big screen or my notes screen?
We're seeing the big screen.
All right, here we go, guys. So this is something I've been really interested in for my entire career, and even before that. I've been into cutthroat trout my whole life, and that's kind of what's led me on this path to hang out with all you guys and to be part of Trout Unlimited. So I wanted to do this presentation because a lot of things have changed in pretty recent time in terms of the what we now believe, you know, how cutthroat have evolved and the time that it's taken them to evolve. And a lot of things have kind of changed from some of the some of the stuff you've probably seen before. So you know this about me. This is kind of for other audiences, but I'm the Rio Grande Basin program director now, in charge of Toner and another guy, Garrett, down in New Mexico. But we are we're a good team. We've been friends for a very long time, all three of us, and we're excited to work together. So I'm starting to work a little bit on the other side of the line, which is my home state. I was born and raised in Taos, New Mexico. This picture I chose because this is me doing a conservation action to benefit Rio Grande Cutthroat by removing the non-native brook trout from Jim Creek. The guys on the chapter know this, but last year we held the first annual San Luis Valley chapter brook trout removal challenge at Jim Creek, where we challenged our membership to remove as many brook trout as they could, following the daily limit of 14 fish per day. And each one of those fish was good for a raffle ticket for a super cool Scott rod and a Ross reel. And I took the prize. I told everybody I would compete. I did, and I got it. This year, we're doing the same thing. I won't be competing, folks. Please participate. We've seen a lot of really cool things happening at Jim Creek. The population has really turned around in 6 years. We've done a whole suite of projects. It's a whole separate presentation. But if you've never been to Jim Creek and you're in the area, please go check it out. It's a tributary to La Jara Reservoir in Conejos County. You can find it from there. So here tonight, we're going to talk about cutthroat evolution and also kind of how you can still find and catch Rio Grande cutthroat. And I'm only going to touch briefly on the human impacts because it makes me sick. And it's amazing in the time perspective that I'll share with you tonight. So these are the two pieces of literature that I used for this presentation. Trout and salmon here of North America. Are you seeing my cursor, Deacon? Yeah. So Trout and Salmon in North America. This is by Dr. Robert Benke, Dr. Trout, with illustrations by Joseph Tomalleri, the foremost well-known ichthyologist that does illustrations. This book is a fantastic book, and it goes through all the trout and salmon in North America. It's not just cutthroat. I suggest it to everyone. It's a great present for folks. It's a great coffee table book. It's absolutely beautiful. So up until about 2002, this captured the state of the knowledge of cutthroat trout evolution and distribution. Following that, a lot of new science, a lot of really cool stuff has been happening. And that has been captured in this newer book that was released in 2018, which is really a collection of works and literature that was presented as part of a special workshop to try to address problems with cutthroat trout taxonomy and to introduce some of this new science, and that has kind of flipped things a little bit in terms of what we thought we knew and how long it took. So these are what I'm referring to. There's a lot of citations in both books, so I apologize for not being super strict on each paper I cited in here, but you can find it all in these two works. Just to cover some of the basics before we kind of move forward, all this kind of relates to a species concept. You know, there's up to 26 different kind of species concepts. It's basically ways that we define what is a species and what are those criteria that establish a species from one another. The standard and kind of the driving concept that Benke used was the biological species concept, and this is kind of really defined by a guy named Mayer back in the 60s. But it has presented challenges for cutthroat taxonomy and nomenclature in particular. The geologic time frame has really broadened recently, and so that has opened up a lot of opportunity for further research and discovery. This is something that I know Deacon would be really interested in, and I'm sure he can show us better examples, honestly, of the crazy events that these various fish assemblages have gone through over time, and it's even broadened beyond some of these major things that Benke had identified. And so I've been looking at visuals on some of these things, like when some of these ancient lakes breached, like Lake Missoula, that breached at 35,000 times at the flow of Niagara Falls, so like 100 million cubic meters per second. Pretty intense. So and then also classification. So this is like depending on whatever species concept you're using and the rules of the International Code for Zoological Nomenclature. So there are pretty strict rules that has kind of resulted in some kind of clusters, so to speak, around what is what and where are they from. So here's Dr. Trout, the man himself. Great storied career. He died, just a few years ago now. He's spent his career at CSU, and he was the world's foremost expert at the time on cutthroat trout. He kind of really developed the basic knowledge and distribution and classification, kind of following some really early work that was then used. So his work is kind of widely used as the framework for conservation and management actions on the ground. So that book I showed you guys, Trout and Salmon, is kind of his seminal work, and he published that in 2002. So here's kind of getting back to the beginnings with Benke's work. So again, Trout and Salmon, at the time, the most complete reference. It followed and kind of expanded on some stuff that Jordan and Everman started in 1896, where they started really kind of describing 8 subspecies, and that's where things got weird even back then. Subspecies really aren't accepted by that zoological nomenclature code. So they're real, but they're not real. And so out of that came a trinomial nomenclature. So 3 Latin names for the genus, species, and subspecies. And so that's kind of the nuance that Benke really kind of introduced. And he took those 8 subspecies those guys started working on, and he grew that list. And what Benke recognized was there were 4 major subspecies of cutthroat trout that included the coastal group, the west slope group, the Yellowstone group, the Lahontan group. So those are the 4 major groups that he identified. And within them, there were 14 minor subspecies. So these are the major subspecies and the minor subspecies. And 2 of those 14 subspecies were extinct. And that included one of our fish, the yellowfin cutthroat from the Arkansas. Benke's time frame looked back based on kind of the fossil record available to him and other information. His time frame was 2 million years. and then as much as 1 million years since divergence of those four groups. So pretty recent evolution. And so in that time frame, we know some of these geologic events, and you can infer some things about those geologic events and how they may have opened colonization routes and led to the radiation of the subspecies various pathways. But as you'll see, that time frame has greatly expanded. So this is Benke's phylogenetic map. This is kind of what he considered in terms of time. So early on, the coastal group broke off from all others. This continues to be supported today by the new genetics and the new geology. So this coastal clade of fish is a sister to all other cutthroat. And then a little bit longer in time, the west slope broke off. The west slope originally had the largest distribution of all of these groups. The west slope is one of the major four groups. Then you get on a little bit further and there's a split. This group is the Lahontan group. They're very distinct from the Lahontan Basin. These are the Pyramid Lake fish and fish we've all seen great pictures of, and something I'd encourage you as cutthroat travelers to see. Sometime we've got some cool stories happening right now in Lahontan world. And then you kind of get to our group, which is the Yellowstone group. And this is interesting to look at for now, but all of this is kind of going to get mixed up here pretty quick. For the most part, these fish and some are still included in this group, but we'll get back to that as we get a little further along. So getting back to Dr. Trout's major subspecies and some of his some of the notes that you can get from his books. He's got some great stories. This is just barely touching some of the really cool anecdotal stories he records. He went through an enormous amount of information and organized it, and it's really cool. So again, I encourage you to look through that book. So again, the coastal cut, sister clade to all others. It broke off early. Interestingly, it co-evolved with rainbow trout, so they had a reproductive barrier, something that have allowed them to evolve for what now appears to be 10 million years. And so they've been unchanged through time. They occupy generally the same area. There are certainly impacts on the ground, just like everywhere else, not necessarily as troublesome as some of these inland cutthroat. They're still doing pretty good. There's sections of their range up in southeastern Alaska that are pretty remote and untouched. But they started, in the Eel River, so 2,000-mile range, cool fish. And they are the only anadromous cut. So these guys, they call them in Oregon and Washington bluebacks. They do spend some time in estuaries. You can get some sea run fish that have kind of different look and a little bit stronger from being out there in the ocean. The next major group is the west slope. This is a fish that was recorded early. We get a note from Meriwether Lewis in 1805 where he and his party caught a bunch of these fish and ate real well on them near Great Falls of the Missouri River in present-day Montana. It was described later in 1853, a guy with a fly rod caught this type specimen for the original description in the same location. So he had read those notes, went back there 50 years later and got the west slope documented. Originally the greatest distribution of all the inland subspecies. Yellowstone, this is our group of fish. It's still kind of our group of fish, although things have changed a little bit. This is our best known subspecies because of Yellowstone Lake, because of the early national park, tons of old media related to Yellowstone Lake and the Yellowstone cutthroat. Benke had identified 6 minor subspecies within this group of fish, and that included all of our natives. An interesting note of Yellowstone, and something that had obviously led to a huge problem, a problem particularly apparent in Colorado, is nearly 1 billion eggs were collected. That's a little over exaggeration, but I'm a fisherman. And they were distributed between other states between 1899 and 1955. So we literally propagated 1 billion of these things and moved them everywhere we could. And the extent of what people have done in the Rio Grande is just phenomenal. It's crazy what early folks did with horses to get fish around our mountains. That's the reason the upper Rio Grande is totally barren of a true conservation population. The Lahontan group, major group, really cool group, old group, major subspecies with 4 minor groups defined by Benke. 2 of them have not been named yet, that remains. And the largest cutthroat are the Lahontans, with a report from Benke's book that the record was a 39-inch 41-pounder from Pyramid Lake. So, you know, we got to get back there, folks. We are on our way. In Pyramid, they're catching them in the high 20 pounds, right? So 28, 29 pound fish. So here's the minor subspecies list from Dr. Trout. Our group, the Yellowstone group, included what he considered the Snake River fine spotted. Some nice guy named that group, named that fish after Benke. So it's Clark eye, Benke eye. Also in that group is the Bonneville, the Rio Grande, the Yellowfin, Greenback, Colorado River. That has changed a lot, and we'll talk about that. And then, you know, in the Lahontan group, some of the minor subspecies he identified, which still kind of exist, and then some, the Humboldt, White Horse Basin fish, Paiute cutthroat, and the Alvord cutthroat. And this one, as well as our yellowfin, are extinct. So what's different now, and how has that changed our understanding of cutthroat evolution? So there's some new stuff, right? So the fossil record has changed from Benke using 2 million years ago to over 10 million years ago. Now we have some fossil records in the Lahontan Basin of cutthroat-like fish aged over 10 million years. So our whole clock changed, you know, substantially. So that introduces a whole lot of different geology that can lead to a whole lot of different speculation for how fish distributed and how often and how long they were connected. And that gets to something that's kind of really rising to the surface in all of this, is this new way of kind of thinking of these fish is as a giant metapopulation connected at times over great amounts of time. So we are always, as humans, you know, considering 2021, but you know, in another million years, things will have changed again, and maybe some of these fish will share genes again, or in different places things will happen. So that geological setting is different. Like I mentioned, now we've got stuff like Lake Idaho, which was a little bit out of the range, coming back into play. Some really cool events, as I mentioned. Doing my research on this, you see some really neat graphics and presentations and story maps about what some of these floods look like. Lake Missoula, you know, that just scoured half of Washington and resulted in these really crazy geological areas in geography. It's really neat to look at. So I encourage you to kind of look at some of that if you haven't before. It was something that was on the newer side to me. I've been involved in this stuff a lot, the molecular genetics and how that's evolved, and the different ways of looking at it, from mitochondrial DNA to nuclear DNA to Y chromosomes, number of chromosomes, you know, and also general taxonomic kind of old school meristic counts, you know, the physical attributes that you can count on an animal. And so we'll talk about how all of that is kind of weighed into this this new way of grouping these fish. So here's getting to kind of some of the new stuff. This molecular clock that was developed in this paper in 2018. This is a really cool paper in that book that I recommend if you're going to pick it up. And so this looks at, here on the left, we're looking at kind of the divergence between an ancestor and then all of these cutthroat fish. So the bold is the fossil record time frame, and the number below it is using a 1% divergence rate. And so it's super complicated genetics, and I can't understand it. So the bottom line is, this is millions of years ago. So 10.7 million years ago is when the cutthroat broke off from these other fish. You'll recognize some of them, you know, rainbows. These are the Mexican kind of fish, and the Apaches and Gilas. And so then for 7 million years, there was gene sharing all over. You know, there wasn't any kind of divergence. There wasn't any isolation that led to the divergence. So about 3 million years ago, things started to diverge. You know, the different different geographies kind of became isolated from one another, and genes were shared differently from that point on. So everything has the same basic makeup, but then they started to diverge a little from each other. Interestingly, in our group, you'll see things have totally flipped from how we manage on the ground and how we think of it. So early on, 2 million years ago, the Bear River fish and Yellowstone fish broke off. They diverged a little. And we had this other group. Then somewhere in between there, and this is better to look on this one now. So we're right here. So about 2 million years ago, that Bear River group and the Yellowstone group broke off, and then they separated from one another about 600,000 years ago. When that divergence happened, there was a period of time before this group started to split. And early, the Colorado blue lineage fish, what we know of as now the native to the Yampa and the Green River, split off from this other group. And Bonnevilles are really close in our group, right? And so then the Bonnevilles broke off from our group, and then you've got our group that broke into 2 different Rio Grandes, which we already kind of knew, but now we really know. The green lineage Colorado fish, which is pretty separate from the blue lineage, right? I mean, blue is a long time before the green diverged. So different pathways into what, you know, some people might consider somewhat connected system, right? It's the Green River and the Yampa River flow into the Colorado River, which is where this fish is native, the Upper Colorado and the Gunnison and the Dolores. And then we have our greenback fish, our super weird story, a Colorado story, the Bear Creek fish, and Bonnevilles. And another interesting piece of this is these Bonnevilles and the Bear River is actually called the Bear River Bonneville. So I just thought that was fascinating that our Bonnevilles are a little bit, closer to Rio Grandes than they are to the Bear River fish right next door. And currently the Bear River and Lake Bonneville are connected. They weren't for almost all of this time period, but now they are. So interesting new stuff. And then you kind of get down into these, the coastals broke off early, the Houghton group, and then the West Slope group. So this, comparing it back towards Benke, you see this flip here where, and this is kind of hard to see, guys. This Snake River fish, believe it or not, and I know this isn't going to be interesting for a lot of folks that have caught Snake Rivers, that they even with these really, really refined molecular techniques, they're not differentiating between Yellowstones. This fish and this fish have no molecular difference in their DNA. They have a morphological difference. They look different. They have an ecological difference. But maybe this kind of separation into these 2 morphologies, or these 2 ways these fish that have the same genes look is a little too recent even to kind of see in our genetic signature. Another kind of interesting thing is this Bonneville fish, which was kind of thought to broke off a little bit early, later than this group broke off. This fish is actually kind of closer up here in this grouping of the Colorado fish. So that.
Hey Kevin, really quick, sorry. Looks like I'm not seeing your cursor.
Oh,
so
you're not?
just to point that out.
Okay,
Sorry.
I don't know. Yeah, so that's. Are you seeing it now? Okay,
Yes,
so
yes.
That's what it is. I was using the wrong screen. So sorry, I've been pointing at the wrong thing, guys. So yeah, this Snake River fish and this fish, the Yellowstone, are we can't differentiate anymore, even though they look different, which is why probably Benke called it out, but he was always completely blown away that there were 2 lineages that co-evolved and had complete connection to each other the whole time. So he never really understood what was going on with that Snake River fish, and now we kind of know it's just the resolution's not high enough yet to see kind of what genetic differences they have, what keeps these fish fine spotted and what keeps these fish a different color with bigger spots. But then I was also saying that this Bonneville fish is actually a little bit closer up in this group, and then this Colorado River group broke out, right? Because now we have this green lineage and blue lineage, and they are both diverged at separate times rather than being a branch here. There's a branch here and a branch there for these two fish that we currently manage as a single subspecies. So that's all new, different stuff.
Hey, Kevin,
So-
real quick, try to highlight your cursor with the control key and a click of your mouse.
I don't know what happened. Did that do anything for you?
If you hold the control key and click your mouse, it should highlight.
Ben, you're so fancy. This thing? See that? Lasers?
Oh, look at that.
Ooh, sophistication. That's why we brought the USGS here, guys. So cool. I'll use that. Thank you, Ben. So we'll move on here before I put you guys to sleep. So genetics versus traditional meristic classification. And this gets to something that kind of like I just wanted to talk through with you guys, because I think we've all got little bits and pieces of how the genetics story has started to change. And I wanted to kind of touch base with that versus traditional methods, right? So beginning here in 2002, and then again in 2008 and 2012 in particular, Jessica Metcalf and a lot of other folks started recognizing that the modern genetics testing they were doing was starting to disagree with what we thought was on the ground. There were some real problems that came to light, and the biggest one, and our prime example here in Colorado, is the greenback or the South Platte native. Was years, decades into an ESA recovery program. They were formally listed endangered species. They were near recovery, but it turned out that we had restored those greenbacks with other fish, and those other fish represented those two separate lineages of Colorado River cutthroat trout. So the bluefish and greenfish were both used to recover the native, and we didn't realize it until Jessica looked at these ancient museum samples with modern DNA and said, nope, there's only one population of the true South Platte native that is still in existence. And that fish was located outside of its native range in the Arkansas Basin, where it had been put by a guy in the 1800s. So the only remaining South Platte native was in the Arkansas. Hadn't been, nobody had done anything to it. And meanwhile, we recovered forever the wrong fish. They're still really good, valuable fish, because as you'll see, distribution has been so impacted that these fish on the landscape anywhere protect that genetic diversity. So they're really still valuable populations. It's just this new stuff, this new knowledge has redefined things. And so we're now in a tricky situation with the South Platte native, particularly because of this. The type specimen, or the original specimen that was utilized to create the greenback, the stomius fish, it was actually a Rio Grande cutthroat, and it was just the wrong location was entered. And so we now have to go through this whole formal taxonomic process of identifying and accepting a new type specimen, probably from the Bear Creek population. But it hasn't really happened yet, and people are going to be debating that for a while. Okay, and so but what I wanted to get through with you guys is that in 2013 we said, hey, is this DNA like too much? Is it telling us something that no human could tell with their own eyes? Is it getting away from like some of the earlier, more well understood biological species concepts, where in general people, especially experts, are supposed to be able to classify the species correctly at least 75% of the time with kind of observable traits, right? Things you can count, these meuristics. So in 2013 we did that. We took all Jessica's fish from across the landscape. We took some fish from those populations and we marked them down, and then the larval fish lab at Colorado State University did a blind meuristics test. So they measured all these traits, not knowing where any of these fish came from. And the study correctly assigned, with good statistics, the fish to the right lineages, regardless of where they were on the landscape. So that's all to say that the new genetics is helpful. it's not going above and beyond what humans could observe, and you know, kind of these more traditional taxonomic observable traits. So interesting that we kind of check that and that it checks out. Really neat. You know, it kind of makes probably a bunch of people feel somewhat bad that they, you know, they thought they were putting the right fish in the right place. So we get to a place that's like, now what? You know, that's what this book is all about, this newer book. In 2015, they had to call this special workshop. They knew there were problems with classification and nomenclature. They knew some of this new DNA was changing the game. The new fossil evidence and geologic record was coming to light. So people had to get together and figure it out. And, you know, and kind of importantly, the old biological species concept didn't ever really work, right? Because there had been subspecies that didn't really fit into that scheme, or the you know, the taxonomic nomenclature, the rules that define how you name an animal. So it's kind of like this group was also, is it necessary to define a new species concept? And the answer to that, based on this panel of professionals, was yes. So moving forward, the new species concept adopted by this panel unanimously came from a guy named De Queiroz from the Smithsonian in 2007, and it's called the unified species concept. And so the kind of the general definition for this concept is a species is a separately evolving metapopulation lineage, in which lineage refers to an ancestor descendant series through time, and a metapopulation refers to an inclusive population made up of connected subpops. So that gets to this like kind of mind-blowing, deep time way of saying all these fish have been connected before numerous times, and they likely will be connected, so that those genes can flow throughout this huge assemblage and giant geographical area. So they adopted this unified species concept, and it really helped align with the trend to get away from kind of some of the older biological species concepts and move towards an evolutionary species concept. So what did that panel agree on? Because they didn't agree on this last thing, but they'd agreed that the 14 subspecies that Benke had was no longer scientifically adequate. The 4 major groups didn't change, but the timing of divergence of those groups did. The group feels that the 4 major groups should all be elevated to a full species status. And then more, you know, they also think that kind of more of this work might even result in more full species in these fish. The panel also agreed that there's available evidence to identify 25, we're not calling them subspecies anymore, but they are uniquely identifiable evolutionary units. So units that are unique, that carry diversity in genes that need to be preserved. The lack of agreement, which is understandable because it's an enormous amount of work, particularly when you think about the original type specimen for greenback cutthroat being the wrong species, entirely wrong species. You got a lot of renaming and all these taxonomic rules, and it's confusing. And I mean, I tried to read that chapter 3 times. It's tough. So there's really no agreement on the new scientific names. Like for instance, a lot of the suspected, if we were to elevate some of these groups to full species status, by rules they would have to adopt like the earliest names. So even though like, so the Yellowstone group, the group that we're part of, would carry the name Virginalis, which is the Rio Grande Cutthroat's name, because that was described prior to the other ones. So so it would be tricky. And you know, honestly, and what you guys probably see a lot as we talk about this is it's getting more and more it's just getting easier to look at these lineages by where they are, their place, their basin or their streams. Identify with the place. So this is what these new 25 subspecies look like in their range. So, you know, each group is outlined by the color. You know, so when you look at the Yellowstone group, our group is huge, right? So that's us. And then you look at the West Slope group, which is fascinating because there are now 9 uniquely identifiable evolutionary lineages when Benki had 1 for West Slopes. So this is the big addition. We added, I believe, 3 lineages. We added the Bear Creek lineage, which is different than the Bonnevilles, different than the Yellowstones. The green lineage, or see in this one, see this paper is even getting more confused. So this is actually the blue lineage, but these guys want to call it green because it's the Green River fish. Then you get the Grand, so I think it refers to the Grand Canyon maybe. This is the green lineage Colorado River Cutthroat. So blue lineage Colorado River Cutthroat, green lineage Colorado River Cutthroat. And then our most recent San Juan fish, and this fish is actually, you know, at the time of the publication was considered extinct, but we know it's not extinct anymore. And then you get the ones that we already knew about, although this paper doesn't separate Rio Grandes. You get the greenback, a pure native to the South Platte, and the yellowfin native to the Arkansas. So really cool stuff. Yeah,
Kevin, can I jump in?
sure.
Historically and colloquially, the Colorado River was also known as the river.
Makes sense.
Okay.
So so this particular paper is advocating for these kind of common names that help us. You know, it's unfortunate they didn't call out these 2 Rio Grande clades because you know, they kind of knew it. It's just I think this paper just didn't do a very good job on that one. But you know, some of the neat stuff with West Slope and some of the neat stuff as anglers in general is now we have all these kind of new little spots, right? Like in the Lahontan, there's the Paiute, which we had, then there's the Lahontan, and then there's a couple new groups, the Quinn River group and the Coyote group. So as anglers, traveling anglers, we can kind of go and see some of these lineages where you know, when Deacon was making his trip up to West Slope country, he didn't probably really know how many different unique evolutionary lineages there were in this zone. And you know, you get one all the way out here butting against this coastal range. These are West Slope cutthroat trout, totally isolated. And then you also get some fish, some West Slopes up into well into Canada. So kind of neat to see that, you know, we went from 14 to 25. One of the fish that we thought was extinct is not. There's hope yet for the yellowfin. Some of the Benki anecdotes kind of give hope. Like he suggested that there was maybe records of private stalking on the Grand Mesa of some ultra rich English dude who was trying to be a conservation minded land owner and literally got burned out by the locals that were pissed off they couldn't poach. So Benki said maybe there were fish stocked in one of his lakes, and maybe they're somewhere on the Grand Mesa. There's, you know, potential that Leadville hatchery had yellowfins in it for a time. So you never know. With these new techniques, we might yet identify some yellowfin genetics on the landscape. I think that'd be really cool. You know, a dream for some of us. So let's get to our Southern Rocky Mountain fish, and then I'll get kind of on to some of the pictures and stuff that you guys might want to see if I'm boring you with evolution. So these Southern Rocky Mountain uniquely identifiable ecological evolutionary units include that blue lineage fish from the Green and the Yampa, the green lineage fish from the Upper Colorado, Gunnison, and Dolores, our greenback problem, the South Platte native, the yellowfin of the Arkansas, the Rio Grande, which we know has two uniquely identifiable evolutionary groups, the Rio Grande proper, and then the Pecos and Canadian. And then, you know, at the time of that publication in 2018, they still thought the San Juan fish was extinct, which means Colorado wasn't really telling them much. So that gets away from the evolution part, and I'm going to touch real quickly on kind of the bad news. You know, the European colonization route. We took a fast route to destruction here. in a little more than 200 years, this is being nice. We remember we looked at Meriwether Lewis, in what we can only define as pristine country in 1803. And a little more than 200 years later, we've almost erased it all. 10 million years of evolution. It's getting worse. And there are more and more complex factors, climate change, all these things that are harder to control. We have to turn it around. We have to maintain that diversity across the landscape. We need to protect, like I said, even though these fish that were introduced to the South Platte aren't the true native, they have incredible value, and they're holding diversity of genes. And we got to do it if we want good fishing and if we want a healthy environment. It's not too late, like especially considering San Juans. We just found a fish that was thought to be extinct forever. And there were more than one populations. They're working on getting some more out on the landscape. In the next decade or so, Wolf Creek on the other side of the pass from us will be occupied by the San Juan native. And there's some populations, Aboriginal populations, that are close. Just kind of going on the record to kind of make that point. It took 17 years from description to extinction for the yellowfin cutthroat. Pretty quick, we got rid of them. Stalking mostly on that one, rainbows and other fish, and then mines and all the other stuff. But 17 years to wipe out something that evolved in millions. The greenback was considered extinct in 1937. They found some populations later in the 60s, but it's probably likely that those populations had been, altered. People had put them there. We do know that there was still one population left, and it just magically survived in the Bear River watershed and in the Arkansas. And so, hope is not lost for those genes. The Rio Grande Cutthroat itself here in the San Luis Valley was extirpated from the main stem before 1900, long time ago. And it only occupies about 11% of its historic range in total. The West Slope cutthroat, that was the widest distributed species in Benke's estimation. And, in 2002, in his book, it occupied 3% of its range in Montana. Lahotans were extinct from Tahoe in the 40s, and there's records of 30-pound fish. Sad stuff that today we would be so thankful to have 30-pounders in Tahoe. I mean, we could be talking about some real ski and fish opportunity, Thad. We'd be, getting a little après Lahontan action. Some of the general culprits, and I'm preaching to the choir. You guys know a lot about this. Stalking, big time. Brook trout, rainbow trout, cutmut galore. Colorado was happy with cutmuts forever. Until kind of recent times. I think they still actually maintain several strains of mixed genetics in hatcheries. That gets back to Yellowstone Lake and then Trappers Lake, our version, Colorado's version of Yellowstone Lake, where millions of eggs were propagated and distributed from trappers. A lot of that speaks to the management of the time, to the lifestyle and life needs of the time. I think there's some books in like Glenn Hinshaw's book about the Upper Rio Grande talks about, guys at Wagon Wheel Gap putting up 2,500 fish in a weekend on salt, to take back to Pueblo for the winter. I mean, it was, talk about catching, our limit of 14 brookies and feeling like we're helping our cutthroat population. Imagine if we took out 2,500 in a weekend. So there's some stuff going on there. Land use, the literature mentions overgrazing over 100 years ago. We're still dealing with that problem all over the federal landscape. I mean, you get a lot of really good, we'll manage differently, we'll do things differently. I think this chapter knows well with our experience at Jim Creek. We put up a fence and things changed. It didn't change before that. It'd be lovely if it could. I just don't believe in it. I would love to be proven wrong somewhere, sometime, that proper grazing can occur on public land. What we are calling grazable ground is pitiful, and we're breaking our own rules constantly. Climate, this is nothing new for this fish. I mean, that's one of the cool things about these fish. One of the cool things about that geologic history. These floods, these mega droughts, these ice ages, there's some resiliency, but we're all of a sudden, even humans are starting to notice what's happening now, right? We're finally saying, hey, maybe we're doing something. Maybe does anybody care? I don't know. We will see. Management priorities. Do we in Colorado spend more money and effort on kokanee salmon or a native cutthroat? That's a question I'm legitimately asking. I don't feel like I should have to, but my friends and I, and Ben on the call is probably laughing already. We contemplate that it must be nice, if we were kokanee anglers, you could both sit on the boat all day, catch your fish, and call CPW and tell them they suck. So I believe the agency is hearing from a louder group of anglers than folks interested in native cutthroat trout. I just don't think they're hearing from us as much as they are from people that can literally call from the boat and complain. I think this is a legitimate question. I think we need to ask ourselves, do we want to at least equal this out? Maybe the money game is tied to license revenues and how the program operates. I get that, but maybe the effort can change a little. I don't know. Some of my personal kind of things, and I'm about to get off the soapbox. So you guys don't have to hear me bitch anymore. Acceptance. Are you asking for cutthroat opportunities as an angler? Are you asking the agency to give you more opportunities for kids, opportunities for elders? I've long known I can get to these mountains and I'll be alone in some of them. I'm getting older now and I have kids now. I can't take my kids to any of these places, and soon I won't be able to go to some of them. Are we asking for cutthroat opportunities for more of our population? Are we happy with slob, machine-fed, rainbowoids, tiger monkey fish, whatever they're making in a hatchery these days? Is that what we want? It's a question we need to consider, and we need to be communicating what in fact we do want. Does anybody even know we have natives? I kept secrets for years, and now I'm realizing that's shooting my life's work in the foot. And then it gets back to this main question I have: can all of us access native trout in Colorado? My answer is no. That needs to change. So that's the soapbox, guys. Now it's game time. So a lot of this chapter knows about some of these opportunities. We've been working on stuff like this for years with Parks and Wildlife. We've developed a brochure in recent years that identifies some really good, suitable places for people to connect with fish, and places that are managed specific for recreation, that don't impact the conservation value or the conservation strategy moving forward. We certainly don't want too many folks messing around in some of these Aboriginal populations that are the absolute safe of our native genetics. But there are lots of opportunities. This is the list. These are recreation populations in the San Luis Valley. I didn't go across the state line here. This is what we have in Colorado. This list is a little bit bigger than it should be, guys. There's some on here that are occupied by brook trout, that winter kill from time to time. There are some that that have other non-native fish. There's some that have like a few Rio Grandes, but mostly brooks. So this list is an older list. It hasn't been whittled down to what we've got really in terms of cutthroat, but I want to show you there is an effort by the agency, by CPW, to provide recreational opportunities. It gets to, there are some very remote places on this list. There are very few kind of easy to access places, but there are a few. And so, this list again is more than what's kind of real in my mind, but it does show that we do have a lot of opportunities. That kind of looked at kind of some strategy, I guess, and some ways I think about how to find some good opportunities when picking from a list like that. Look at the maps and the aerials, choose not only good deep lakes and some of these other characteristics I'll identify, but also kind of look at the trails, guys. You know, make sure that you're prepared for what you're undertaking. Look on the website, search for stalking records. The Sangre de Cristos and the San Juans are stalked every other year. So each mountain range is stalked every 2 years via airplane, and they've been doing that for a long time. And we'll get to it in a minute, but we're starting to take a closer look at those populations that we've been stalking and kind of identifying how well the program has done. Frankly, we haven't been to a lot of these places. We're getting there now. Choose lakes that have streams, near streams, and especially lakes that are fed by streams. If there's a stream coming into the lake rather than the lake kind of starting at the uppermost boundaries of the watershed itself, kind of fed by a scree field and snowmelt. If you choose one that's got a little stream channel, or sometimes lakes that have a channel in between them, that's going to give you a better indication that those fish can persist through winters and that they might be able to reproduce. The web is absolutely filled with encrypted information. There's a lot of niche groups. There are a lot of folks that like spend hours on this. You can connect and make friends with a lot of people. Deacon's, like if anybody's seen Deacon's map, it's incredible. It's really neat. I mean, and like, especially in the world we live in today with COVID, these are great ways to kind of, take up a new group and kind of mix. And, I mean, I've been, I'm a complete failure for the Trout Unlimited organization in terms of cybersecurity. I fail almost every simulated fishing attempt that they send at us. I'm ranked like 289 out of 300 employees. So I don't know about the dark web. It scares the hell out of me, but it's out there. Maybe Deacon can give us a tour of the dark web and where the cutthroat information is. You can get like some Rio Grande Cutthroat info and then a couple hundred credit card numbers at the same time. And then, I encourage you to kind of look at the clusters of lakes in the landscape and look at the list and kind of see if you think that more than one lake within a couple miles of each other is stocked with these natives. And then, if you're backpacking, if you can do that, you can check out a couple and do maybe a loop route, or you might be able to, if one isn't really working, you might be able to hike over a hill and hit the next one. So another kind of piece of advice is look at some clusters. Here's the High Lakes program. I have 2 of my fellow board members from Running Rivers on the call, and so they're going to be extremely disappointed that I don't have a flashy logo and some of our really kind of high-tech visuals that I'm completely inept at actually creating. Sorry for my very dull PowerPoint. I wish it could be more interactive. But starting in 2018, a group that I'm involved with that I've helped create Running Rivers, which is a 501c3. It's a cutthroat oriented group. That's our mission. Connect people with cutthroat trout, raise money through novel recreation based around cutthroat trout. We've been successful raising money, and we put that money back where we want it for cutthroat trout efforts. And so here in this basin, we've been really fortunate to launch a pilot program with Parks and Wildlife as our partner. We share the costs to hire 2 seasonal technicians to go and sample all those lakes that are stocked by airplane that nobody has ever gone back to see if the stocking is working. So we've done that now 2 years. Unfortunately, we couldn't do it in 2020 because of travel constraints. But in 2018 and 2019, those young fish biologists had a really cool job in a really cool landscape that set them on a great path for their career, and they sampled 31 out of 66 of these lakes. So this is the number that Estevan Vigil, our local biologist, is calling the correct number of lakes that should have Rio Grande Cutthroat. However, we have realized through some of this sampling, these 31 lakes we have sampled, some of those lakes don't have cutthroat in them. Some of them don't have any fish in them. Some of them have nothing but brook trout in them. And one had rainbows. So we have learned a lot, and Estevan has used that information to adjust the stocking regime. Some lakes were getting stocked too much. Some lakes needed more stocking. Some lakes weren't worth stocking because we were feeding brook trout. So really cool to see that information go two directions. One to the management agency to make decisions on how they use a limited resource. And the other direction is information for people like us, that identify the trail, the out and back, the profile of the trail. Is it okay? Maybe it's only 5 miles to some of these sangre lakes. Is it 100% up? Yes, it is. It's all up. Sometimes 3,000 or 4,000 feet a game. And so we've got really cool way to kind of use this information for management of the resource and also for helping people connect. And so, I wanted to kind of share, those reports, but we just really didn't have enough time. And I kind of geeked out on the evolution side. So I built that side a little heavy, but that's part of the feedback I'm asking you all for. I do have my Running Rivers logo, so guys, I'm representing Run Fish Beer. Do it right, Flyathlon. And please join us at a Flyathlon, folks. It's for everyone. We have people from 6 to 76 participating. We raise a lot of money. We drink a lot of great craft beer, and we talk about cutthroat trout. And our flagship race is in the San Luis Valley at Middle Creek. We're not sure if we'll get permitted. We really haven't heard anything from the Trout Ranger District yet. And so we're not sure if we're going to be able to permit that race in person this year. Last year we went virtual, and that was really cool. So you could all be virtual fly athletes. So I encourage you to check out Running Rivers. I should have put a website up here, and the Flyathlon. Check us out, guys. So that's my pitch for that group. So here's some of the results, guys, from these high lake surveys. Yeah, they're worth it. Some of them are magic. Here's kind of some of the data that we're getting out of it. You can see here, Esteban probably wants to stock this lake here pretty soon because we've got a lot of older, larger fish in this group, but we're really not looking for that next age class to recruit into this larger size class. So, this is Crater Lake, which is up on the near Como. It's not the Crater Lake in the San Juans, it's the Crater Lake in the Sangres. So that's kind of like a typical visual you'll get from those high lakes reports. And so now we're going to kind of step back, and I want to kind of just present the whole perspective. And I think Chris Johnson, our good friend from Living Waters Fly Fishing, does this amazingly well. He wants you and I want you to stop and smell the flowers, look at the birds, enjoy what it takes to hold these native fish. It really takes spectacular, connected, healthy habitat, and that will heal you if you don't even fish. So this is what he's looking at. These are all Chris's photos. Again, one more little pitch for Chris. Check out his website. This guy's from Texas, and he knows as much about Rio Grande Cutthroat as I do. He's an advocate. He's educating people all the time. He did a really cool film called Unspoken. I think a lot of you guys have seen this film. It's on his website. If you haven't, it's inspiring and beautiful. So check it out. Here's what it is. Here's one of our, believe it or not, accessible. Oh, here you go, Ben. Laser. Here's our kind of accessible pop. I'm not going to tell you where it is. Most of you know. But look at that scenery. This is where these fish live, minus that beetle kill. That's perfect. This is that scenery. This is hard fishing. This is different than most of us are doing on a daily basis. This is get on your knees and bow and arrow cast. This is sneak up to the edge of the river and just look at fish. This is worthwhile. Stuff like that. Oops, I went too fast. His pictures are huge images, so it takes a while to load. Just stuff like that. Just seeing stuff like that is incredibly healing. Here's a good cast. You'll notice Chris is always camoed up. That's one of his things, and he presented to our chapter a couple of years ago. These cool tight spaces. You might think these fish are super easy. They're not always easy, especially because you got to get so close. So, on your knees, bow and arrow cast, short rods, really cool stuff. Definitely a change of pace for, what most of us probably do most often. I'm sitting in a drift boat most often myself, so I'm including myself. you know, sheer beautiful fish. These things are absolutely gorgeous. And you know, even these smaller fish are going to take your breath away. Just incredible colors. And so I'm going to leave you guys with something that's a pretty motivating image for most of us, and something that that I hope you all pursue. That's a Rio Grande cutthroat in our watershed. He's still out there. So guys, that's the end of my presentation. Happy to take questions. You know, like I said, I'm working on this. I want to share it with more audiences, so I want to make it better. So please help me do that. Thanks for giving me the time.
Bravo, Kevin. Bravo.
Great talk, Kevin.
Glad you like it, guys.
Kevin, I've got a million questions and a million comments, but I think the biggest thing is you are a true native trout hero, and from the bottom of my heart, especially for those of us who adore native fish, it's awesome.
Thanks, Deacon. I had a feeling you'd like it. You could teach me some of the geology. Help me make the geology part better. Awesome, folks. Well, thank you so much. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Any questions? Michael, I'm sorry I wasn't able to talk a little bit about the water work that you read about. That is the other half of what I do. Trust me, I do that stuff too.
I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
So we packed into the Wiminuche on Rio de los Pinos, and we were catching native fish there. The guide said they were Rio Grande cutthroats on that side of the Continental Divide. Is that right? And if so, how did the Rio Grandes cross over the divide?
So it's likely they have mixed heritage. They certainly have mixed heritage. I've been in there too, Michael. That's really incredible place. I'm glad that you got to be up there. You know, you get 15 miles up from Vallecito, and things are spectacular. Those fish, I haven't looked at the exact genetic sampling that's been done there. My estimation is that they have a lot of Yellowstone contributions to that population. They've got a lot of those large spots, but there's records of the folks in the upper Rio Grande that were just prolific at distributing fish and culturing fish. So if you look in that watershed, there's lakes called Emerald Lake and Flint Lakes. Those were actual fish culture sites before 1900. People were packing fish from 30 Mile Campground on the Rio Grande over the Weminuche into Emerald, Flint, all those lakes, and stocking them and then returning to take the eggs from them. There's really cool historical accounts in a book called Crusaders for Wildlife, which was written by a guy named Glenn Hinshaw, who spent his career as a district wildlife manager in the upper Rio Grande. And so he's got some really good accounts of these guys, young men, loading up milk jugs with various species of fish and riding them into that drainage and coming back out in the same day. And you know, one time they got arrested because the guys in the Durango side didn't think they had permits or something, and you know, they went to jail for the night, and then they got fed real well and came back. And so it could be anything, Michael. But my guess is they're mostly Yellowstone genetics in that population. They're really beautiful fish, though, and a really cool habitat.
Kevin, is that how you would explain, or anybody would explain, the cutthroat population in the upper Rio Grande, Pole Creek, Bear Creek area?
Yes, sir. That's exactly the case in all of the upper watershed. Is a lot of Yellowstone genetics. So you have really cool populations in Little Squaw, Big Squaw, Pole Creek, Trail Creek, all those populations. You know, we've been putting Rio Grandes on top of them for decades now, and so you know, there's mixed heritage. They're perfect mutt throat.
Nothing wrong with that.
No. If there were more occupied pier populations. And
Agreed.
there's plenty of room for lots of different kinds of fish, but we need to make sure that our natives and their genetics are secure first, in my opinion.
200 years ago, those waters were probably barren.
Some,
Yeah.
an interesting account from the 1850s, particular to the closed basin in the Sangre de Cristos, was from the Hayden survey, was how are all these streams that are not connected or flow into any other body of water occupied by fish? And then you think of deep time now and this new geological time frame where, like Deacon and I have always wondered, how can we have 700,000-year-old cutthroat fossils in the Hansen Bluff in Alamosa, and Rio Grandes were supposed to have evolved in the last 20,000? What cutthroat was that? So now this new geologic time frame opens that up. So Lake Alamosa could have been a distribution route for, populating all of these streams. At certain levels, some of these waterfalls we know were developed only in the last 60,000 years. So what happened the first 10 million?
And it's not just geologic, it's obviously hydrologic, because there's stories said that 150 years ago, a person could navigate by water from Fort Garland to Alamosa.
So I think,
There's
there's one of the things that I think is a really interesting undercurrent to all of these discussions is just how this fluid transfer that you had these times, ancient Lake Alamosa breached 440,000 years ago, right? But in that same, in the ensuing time, you had times when the valley was cold enough and wet enough to where a fish could swim from the Swatch Creek drainage all the way down to the Rio Grande when the water table was high enough and the conditions were right, and then it would dry up again for millennia, and then those populations that might have spread to the Sangres could have been isolated again. And so, even within these distinct subpopulations, whatever that sinus infection of vowels was for that you still have these micro gene flows that happen, on 1,000-year or 2,000 or 10,000-year scale. I'm so glad to hear some of this information, because like Kevin said, we've had this discussion and debate before that, if Benke is saying that these really are since the last glacial maximum in 20,000 years, why are there all of these cutthroat fossils? And not only that, how would they have gotten over the divide at that time? And so it's neat to see the genetics bear that out.
I agree. I think that's really cool. And I really love that, at the end of the day, all this really complicated genetics work, we can still, scientists, Kevin Bestian and those folks at the Larval Fish Lab, they're the pros of the pros in taxonomy. They can still distinguish these fish from one another blindly. And that was really encouraging. It's not just stuff we're reading in DNA. It is stuff that you can measure and see with your eye.
I'd be curious what Mark Kanishi might have to say, because he's probably explored arguably more of the West, and as far as some of these distinct populations. And, Mark, what is the difference between a Bonneville that you may catch in one sub-basin versus another, or a Colorado River that you catch from the Green River Basin versus maybe something from the Gunnison Basin?
Yeah, well, appreciate it, Deacon. I've always had a hard time relying on the phenotype or the physical characteristics and distinguishing the different cutthroat. For me, it has always been difficult. Now, part of that is because I'm partially colorblind. So some of the colors that you use to phenotypically separate some species, it doesn't appear for me. And all of you who have caught Rio Grande cutthroats know that the spotting pattern can be wildly different. If you look at Tom Malari's print of the Mackinac cutthroat, Rio Grande cutthroat that he drew, that's the most unnatural looking Rio Grande cutthroat I've ever seen. And yet it came out of a known source site. But one point I do want everybody to think about, as well as the impacts in a different way that agriculture has had on our trout populations. And when sheep herders hit this country, a lot of those, particularly Basque sheep herders that were here, they liked a certain population size and type of trout to eat sometimes. And when they changed pastures, they may have found a different or no fish in a creek that they were catching a lot of in some lower pastures. So there was a lot of coffee can biology going on way back when. And there are a lot of accounts of these old Basque sheep herders taking a coffee can of young trout and taking them up to different streams as they were moving their sheep around. So when you mix that all into this whole story, it really changes. It's just another piece of the puzzle that we need to look at in examining really where these fish came from. The San Juan's a prime example. There's plenty of them here just over the divide. And then there's some up Hermosa Creek that the old fish biologists put up there for some safekeeping, but I don't know, those are pretty disparate geological distances as well, with a couple passes in between. So did they end up in that Hermosa drainage naturally, or were they brought there by some old sheep herder? I don't know. It's just hard to say. Kevin, I really appreciate your talk. You did a fantastic job. One thing, and I've been away from the division for 12 years now, so things may have changed significantly, but one thing about the kokanee salmon is we used to use the kokanee almost like exchange of money for different species that we transplanted here in Colorado. So for instance, some moose that we brought into Colorado, we'd repay those other states, and what they wanted were kokanee. So if you think of how many kokanee you have to supply to pay back a whole bunch of moose, well, that's a lot of kokanee. And that kind of got the division, I think, in a cycle with the kokanee of not only the popularity of the sportsman, but also our obligation to pay back other states for other species of animals that we were allowed to bring in and reintroduce. Kokanee was pretty easy for us to find, supply, and raise, and other states have a lot of problems with that, as you know. We had a heck of a time finding and reproducing moose, for example. So, and I don't know if some of that's just layover, Kevin, from those days, or if we're still paying back a lot of these states in kokanee eggs. But that is one reason for the high emphasis historically of kokanee here in the state.
I didn't know that, Mark. That's really good to know. And maybe we can use some kokanee to buy some cutthroat.
Yeah.
For sale.
I will tell you guys, I did read in the paper the other day, just, not to pull you away from the round 2 of the San Luis Valley Brook Trout Challenge at Jim Creek, but the Parks and Wildlife is doing a $10,000 fishing derby at Blue Mesa to help the kokanee population over there. So you guys have until July to go and remove lake trout up to 24 inches, but not bigger. And you can win a lot of prizes. So if ice fishing, Jason, you can get out there, catch some of those not huge lakers, and get some money, and then maybe send some kokanee and for a few cuts. But Mark, a neat point about that Crusaders for Wildlife book that really was eye-opening to me, and I'm ashamed it took me so long to read it, honestly, for working in the Valley for 7 years now, and in the region for 15. All these introductions, reintroductions, phenomenal story. Yeah. Absolutely incredible history and legacy, and the amount of work it took to bring in elk, deer, antelope, moose. Crazy. I just had no idea of the scope and scale, and how hard and how long people worked to bring those animals back. And how, just like I mentioned, us getting rid of the natives out of the main stem Rio Grande in just a matter of years, we did the same thing to apparently up there by Soward's Ranch, kind of up by Freeman's, that they call it Antelope Park because there was a resident herd of 2,000 antelope that were there when people first got there, and 3 years later they were gone.
Yeah. The market slaughters back in those days were pretty extreme, and a lot of our wildlife in the Valley ended up at the Brown Palace and places like that in Denver, feeding the expanding population of the range, including a lot of our fish when you look
Right.
back through the records.
Yeah, really cool. I encourage you guys in the Rio Grande to read that book if you haven't.
You know, Kevin, if I have any hope for our yellowfin, and this kind of goes along with what you guys are saying, is I've got a friend who had chased down some of these kind of old historic records and had ended up finding out about a swap between the state of Colorado and the state of California in the late 1800s, and they California traded some golden trout eggs for some pure Colorado River cutthroat eggs. Somewhere high in the Sierra Mountains, there's a lake with 100% pure Colorado River cutthroats that were the descendants of this swap, in the same way that, you know, Mark, you're talking about. It's been going on for, you know, over 120 years.
All right. Kevin, thanks a lot. That was excellent. And I kind of like it when you get on your soapbox, man. And I think it's pretty amazing with this group. With you mentioned Rio Grande Cutthroat, I think we could just not even have a title for our meeting and just start our whole meeting right there. This was excellent. It's fascinating, Kevin, and you did an amazing job, and really appreciate it. Are there any more questions for Kevin before we turn it over to Doug? All right, then, if there's no more questions, Doug, I think you're up, man.
There we go. Hey, Mark, we've been online now for almost 2 hours, so I think we should just call it quits.
Well, we've got a good program for next time at the very least.
Sorry, Doug, I didn't mean
Yeah.
to take so long.
No, no problem. It's
That's
much more important than watching somebody tie a fly.
I know if that's we love watching you tie flies, though, Doug. But maybe we should. It's kind of like that thing. We start talking about Rio Grande Cutthroat, and there you go. But it's been on here for quite a while.
Good job,
And,
Kevin. Really good job.
We're planning to do the same thing. We're going to try to do the same thing next month, and maybe we don't really have a program plan, so maybe we'll do something a little bit shorter, and then make sure and get Doug's fly tying demonstration in, because everybody loves that too. So
maybe we can
on that note, are there any other comments, or
maybe we can actually get Doug to tie 2 different flies as we move closer to the spring and early summer? Dry flies are always on my mind. So we could do the rubber leg prints.
I think that's an excellent idea, Marty. I think that'd be great. So are there any other comments or anything before we shut the meeting down?
Hey, Mark, I just want to thank everybody in the chapter that has supported our efforts with the Rio Grande Cutthroats. Kevin has done some absolutely tremendous work and has kept this chapter in the forefront to recover those very valuable fish. And we are just absolutely blessed to have those in our backyard. They are truly a unique species. But we couldn't do this, and Kevin couldn't do this without everybody's support in this chapter. And I just want to thank everybody with all the help that you've given in supporting this important fish, including the latest, the Sand Creek project. That's a game changer for us. That's a real legacy project, and wouldn't have happened without the support of this chapter.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, it's really exciting for me, and I think for a lot of us to see the chapter in TU focusing on some of the native cutthroat reintroductions. It's exciting times. All right. Anything else?
I totally agree. And I just have to say, Kevin, I'm mad at you because I was perfectly happy just snowboarding, you know? Now I want to go fishing again. So I'm mad at you because now I'm itchy to go fishing.
Well, what you need is a split board and some skins, and you could do a little backcountry tour with ice fishing.
I wouldn't even know what to do with myself. Are you kidding me? That sounds amazing.
And thanks to everybody who joined us.
Yeah, do that, Rain, and then you can do a program for us.
We will have another virtual meeting on February, I think it's February 23rd, the last Tuesday in February. Let's see here. Yep, February 23rd, we'll have another virtual meeting.
Probably get a newsletter out and a notice out before the meeting starts and what we're going to do. So on that note, thanks to everyone for joining us. It's great to see the usual faces and some new faces. It's exciting. And thank you, Deacon, for organizing the meeting for us too. All right, guys. See you soon.